now that we've learned more about this ABI.encode and decoding, and we know that, okay, this is what the computer, this is what Ethereum, this is what the EVM or any EVM compatible chain is looking for. It's looking for this bytecode. It's looking for this binary stuff. And we just learned a little bit more about how to encode different variables into the binary, into that data bit. Well, what do we do now? Now, since we know that our transactions are just going to be compiled down to this binary stuff, what we can do then is we could actually populate this data value of our transactions ourselves with the binary the code is going to use. So here's our transaction for a contract deployment. The data field of the contract deployment is going to be all that binary code of the contract. For a function call, the data piece is going to be what to send to the address, what data, what function to call on the to address. Let's look at another one of our transactions on Etherscan, right? On one of our contracts. You don't have to. I'm going to look at enter raffle from a previous section. And if we select down, we look at input data, it says function enter raffle, method ID. But if we look at the original, this is what's getting sent in the data field. It's this binary, it's this hex, it's this weird low-level bytes thing. This is how the Ethereum blockchain or whatever EVM chain you're working with knows which function to call. It translates this into a function. And we can do the exact same thing and call these functions ourselves. So what we can actually do with this crazy newfound data encoding stuff, what we can actually do is send the data field of a transaction ourselves in a transaction call. Remember back in this Ethers throwback where this data thing was the contract creation code? Well, instead, we could populate this data thing with our function call code, the exact function that we want to call in the binary in the hex edition. Now you might be thinking, oh, well, why would I do that? I can always just use the interface, the ABI, all that stuff. Well, maybe you don't have that. Maybe all you have is the function name. Maybe all you have is the parameters you want to send, or maybe you want to make your code be able to send arbitrary functions or make arbitrary calls or do random, really advanced stuff, right? That's where sending our function calls directly by populating this data field is going to be incredibly important. So remember, I said you're always going to need the ABI and the contract address to send a function. Now, when I said you always need the ABI, originally we were kind of talking about this thing, this big thing, which is cool, which is the ABI, but this is like the human readable ABI. We can also do it with the not human readable ABI. And additionally, you don't need all this stuff. You can really use just the name of a function and then the input types to send a function call. So the question is then, okay, how do we send transactions that call functions with just the data field populated? And then the next question is, how do we populate the data field? What do we populate the data field with to make one of these function calls? And then how do we send these transactions? Solidity actually has some more low-level keywords, namely static call and call. We've used call in the past before. Does this code look at all familiar to you? Well, it should, because we used a similar setup in our fulfill random words for our lottery, right? We sent money doing this recent winner.call, right? Recent winner was the address of the recent winner, and we did .call, and then we had this weird stuff in this brackets here, and then nothing in the parentheses. So we did actually we used this call keyword previously, but we didn't really tell you what it did. So call is how we can call functions to change the state of the blockchain. Static call is basically how at a low level we call our view or pure functions, right? Static call is going to be like, okay, don't change the state of the blockchain with this one, just give us the return value. So this is kind of similar to like a view or a pure function at low level. There's also a send word, but like basically forget about it. We're just going to be working with call and static call. And later on we'll learn about another one called delegate call, but don't worry about that for now. Recent winner.call, like this, in these little squiggly brackets, we said, okay, we updated the value directly of our transaction in Solidity. So which again, if we had these transaction fields and we just directly updated value in these little brackets, right? We can also directly update gas limit and gas price in these little brackets if we wanted to as well. And in here, these parentheses is where we're going to stick our data. Since all we wanted to do with our withdraw function previously was send money, we said, okay, send money, change the value that we're going to send but don't pass any data. Keep that data bit empty, which is why, again, remember how we hit this button before, right? And we had call data be empty. That's essentially running this command with call data be empty, with this section be empty, and then just updating the value that we sent with the transaction. And so it's this section that we can use to populate data to actually call specific functions. I'm going to put a whole bunch more comments here. So in our squiggly brackets, we're able to pass specific fields of a transaction like value. And in our parentheses, we're able to pass data in order to call a specific function. But in here, there's no function to call since we were just sending Ethereum. If we want to call a function or send any data, we can do this in the parentheses. And I think I spelled that wrong.